Hi, everyone. Welcome to Experian Talks. And in this episode, Experian talks domestic and economic abuse. Now, this is the first of a two-part episode. Now, in the first one, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what economic abuse is, what financial abuse is. And we've got a lovely guest, Antony Price from PayPlan, who's been doing some excellent work in this area. And he's going to help talk us through some of these issues and the work that and the support that PayPlan can give you. And join us for the second part, and then that will talk through some of the support that you can get, what PayPlan are doing, what Experian are doing, and where you can go to get the right kind of support. So, Antony, I'll pass on to you now, and you can just do a bit of an intro into you and some of the work that PayPlan are doing.
Of course, yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me. So I'm Antony, one of the partnership managers here at PayPlan. I've been with the organisation for the last 17 years, so I'm doing a lot of work directly with clients who have a debt need, and more recently working with organisations who want to interact with our services. And of course, during those years, looking at how we best place our services to work with some of the most vulnerable people in society sometimes. For anybody that's not familiar with PayPlan, I guess just as a starting point, we're a free-to-client debt advice organisation that's been in operation for nearly 30 years now. So we formed in 1992. And during that time, we've always supported clients who have been in abusive environments and abusive relationships. More recently, though, what we've really wanted to do is put a focus on the support that we give for those individuals. And so we started by developing some new training courses initially for our staff. We work with quite a local domestic abuse charity to us, an organisation called Broxtowe Women's Project. And we developed a new course that we rolled out to all of our advisors, really to enhance their knowledge on how to best support individuals. I think that's a really important starting point here. That then led to us actually rolling that training out to hundreds of organisations within our sector as well, and really offering more support to them and helping them to identify the best way to support individuals who come in contact with them. Over the last 3 years, we've been working directly with Refuge, who a lot of people will know as being one of the national organisations supporting domestic abuse survivors. And that's become a very important relationship for us, in particular because of the work that we've been doing with survivors directly between the two organisations. But also we've really welcomed them and the support they've given us as an organisation. As an expert in that field, we've really wanted to make sure that everything that we do has the individual at the heart of it, but also concentrating ultimately on safety. And I'll talk more about safety later on. We're now their chosen debt advice partner, and we support hundreds of individuals that they refer through to us for that debt help. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that works and that journey that we support with. More recently, we've been working with a number of local charities, domestic abuse charities. We've set up relationships with dozens of new organisations. And the reason why we've done that now is that we wanted to make sure that we got all of this right. We wanted to make sure that we had a really safe and robust referral partnership with Refuge in place first, and that we really understood how that worked and what we needed to get right before we then expanded and offered that to other individuals. We're now in a place where we feel really confident with that, and we want to reach out to other organisations such as local domestic abuse charities, because those are often individuals that find it very difficult to get into debt advice, and we want to reach out to people and make that easier. So we've been doing a lot of work recently trying to support individuals and organisations to get help.
Wonderful. That is a lot of work you've been doing. So actually, I think, well done, by the way, for kind of taking the lead, particularly in the sector for supporting victims of domestic abuse. Actually gets me thinking about this referrals process, because one of the things I think we'll talk about a little bit as well is that if you're a victim of economic abuse or financial abuse, and we'll talk about those in a minute, but you might not understand that there is support available to you, or help through a credit reference agency or help through PayPlan, or even through a charity like Refuge, for example. So just very quickly, if you can walk me through roughly how that process works. So if someone found themselves in this scenario, they could go to Refuge, for example, and get lots of support. I guess wider support than is provided through financial help, and then they can help refer through to you, and you can help them through a journey then of kind of sorting out financial issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the you talked about some of the barriers there. I guess one of the other barriers to consider is that a lot of people who experience domestic and economic abuse don't necessarily understand or recognize that that's abuse in the first place. And so one of the very first parts is education and awareness. And I think that's building more and more. And there's some key changes in law that are helping to empower that. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on. But certainly, if we're looking at the journey that someone goes through, they could absolutely be working with a charity such as Refuge or others and getting that real hands-on support. And that's really important because there could be many aspects that need support. It could be around finances and economic abuse. It could be around something like tech abuse. So something that Refuge do fantastically well at with is empowering people to deal with tech abuse, but also how to use that safely in the future. And then many other forms of abuse as well that they're getting support with. One of the key things to make a successful partnership work, I think, is absolute trust and transparency. So making it very clear who's responsible for what when it comes to support. And for us at PayPlan, we absolutely recognise that Refuge is the expert when it comes to domestic abuse. We are the debt experts. And so what we need to do is really work together in harmony to understand where those roles and responsibilities lie. And that's something that we worked very hard at the beginning of that relationship to get right, so that we were very clear on what we were all doing. To have that trust in place as well, and to make sure that we really understand the client's circumstances when they're referred through to us. So we absolutely refer to this as being a safe pathway into debt advice. And when we talk about pathways into debt advice, safety for domestic abuse survivors is absolutely key. And so there are several things that we do with that referral process and pathway. First and foremost, ensuring that security and safety is the key factor. So how is the referral coming over, and making sure that's protected, that information. Also, working with Refuge so that they can share with us information that reduces the amount of conversations a client has to have with us directly about that topic. So one of the key concerns is that some organizations don't necessarily do enough to cut out repetition. And that's a real big factor and focus for us in this partnership. Because anybody that's gone through an experience such as domestic abuse, having to retell that story can be very, very uncomfortable and can be very distressing. And I always say to retell a story is often to relive it. And so what we do is ensure that we cut out those elements of repetition. Are they able to share information with us that it really gives us the information we need, so we can help the client immediately? And that's one of the key focuses for us.
Great. Okay, that's some really good points, particularly around repetition, because the last thing I think anyone wants to do is kind of go through the bureaucracy of just repeating the story over and over again to different people, particularly in an organization, but also to separate ones. So, I mean, actually, I'll briefly highlight some of the work we've done, because it kind of links into this, which is we've worked with, as well as Refuge, surviving economic abuse as well. So if anyone actually has lots of questions about credit reports and being in that situation of domestic and economic abuse, how to protect yourself if you've got financial associations, how to protect yourself digitally as well, particularly if you've got shared accounts and so on. So they've got a guide on their website that we worked with them on. So I would just recommend going on there and having a look, and it provides lots of information. But let's jump in, Antony, if I can, let's figure out what this is. So, what is economic abuse? And it might help just to clarify these terms of economic abuse and financial abuse. What does it mean, and what could that really be?
Absolutely.
Obviously, you could probably help clarify this.
Yeah. Often there's two different types of abuse that are sometimes referred to. So financial abuse and economic abuse. And I guess to explain that, it probably would be helpful for me to explain what's been going on most recently with changes in legislation. So for the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a piece of work that's been going through government for some time called the Domestic Abuse Bill. And that was really an attempt to change the current law and how domestic abuse is defined as well. What was fantastic was that this year in April, that became an act and new legislation followed through with that. And there's been some different components with that, really understanding and changing the way that domestic abuse is viewed and what can be classed as domestic abuse. So there's been some new additional elements that will be added into the definition of domestic abuse and what that is. And I think that's very helpful because it really expands what we currently have. And those types of abuse that have always existed but may not have appeared in legislation or appeared in a definition. And one key change is that for the first time, one of the new elements listed into that definition is economic abuse. And economic abuse is something exactly the same as I've said, something that's always existed, but it's now being called out within legislation. So why economic abuse and not financial abuse in that definition? That might be the question. Well, I guess one thing is that if we think only about financial abuse, that's quite restrictive. That might only get you thinking about things like monetary issues, people withholding credit or using credit in a certain way, maybe somebody using credit in a fraudulent way against somebody's will. That's quite limited in terms of what can be classed as financial abuse, whereas economic abuse is far more encompassing. It includes many other forms of abuse, including financial abuse. So it includes financial abuse, but isn't limited to that. So a few examples of things that might be classed as economic abuse could be, yes, somebody having sole control over a family income. Maybe someone saying, I'm dealing with all of that. You pay your money over to me. I'm controlling that. And that's against somebody's will, perhaps. But it could be something like preventing someone from claiming a welfare benefit or having that paid over to them and someone controlling that. It could be interfering with education, training, employment, or not allowing access to travel. So withholding a driving license, passport, which would allow somebody to go out and earn income or allow somebody to attend an interview and further their prospects. It could also be something like damaging property. So, of course, that comes then with an impact economically. So it could be damaging property and items. And all of these things, you wouldn't necessarily class as financial abuse if you're just looking at it in that way. But economically, economic abuse covers a lot of different things.
I think that is a wonderful explanation of the difference between economic and financial abuse, because I think they're kind of used interchangeably sometimes. And obviously economic, as you've just set out, is far broader than just, like you said, using accounts or maybe setting things up fraudulently or so on, or running up debts. There's a lot more to it. And I think it goes to say the kind of scope. And also, for anyone who's watching or kind of thinking about this as an issue, maybe some of the warning signs to start looking for, do you know someone who's having things withheld, doesn't have control over documents, accounts, things like that. So I think we'll jump into that as well and talk about that. And since you highlighted the point really around fraudulent accounts and so on, and about the repetitive journey, I think I'll round off this part of the video by just talking about some of the support that Experian can give, because as a credit reference agency, it means that although kind of limited to the financial abuse side of things, particularly where someone has set up fraudulent accounts in your name, so you've got no knowledge of that, or where someone has used accounts where, maybe you do have kind of joint agreements, or they've used your existing accounts, additional cardholder and so on. Or where they've coerced you into opening an account. So forced is the harsh term, really, but where you've been made to open an account, you can dispute that kind of information. You can come to Experian or a credit reference agency and dispute those accounts directly with lenders, and we'll support you through that journey, which kind of means you only have to tell the story once to Experian or a credit reference agency, and we'll go away and dispute it with all agencies. So we'll get into a bit of the support there in just a moment in our second part of this series. So, Antony, for this part, thank you very much. I think actually you've done a great job of defining what economic abuse is, what financial abuse is, and some of the support that you can get through PayPlan and set this up. So thank you. We'll see you in the second part of this video, and for anyone watching, join that one, and we'll talk about some of the support that you can get as well.